Laura Lee, welcome to the podcast. It's so nice to have you on our show. And I wanted to maybe ask you or start with asking you, how did you get into the world of psychology and sexology of all things?
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, sexology of all things. Well, psychology, I got into right out of high school. I really got into it because I was always kind of that person in high school that was like really nosy. I just loved people's stories and what was going on. And I always wanted to help. I was that person like bringing my friends home and saying to my mum, this person's had a fight with their parents, they're going to stay with us for the night and all that kind of stuff. I was always doing that kind of stuff. So I knew I wanted to go into a helping profession, and I've always been so fascinated by people's stories. So that was many years ago. So I've been a psychologist now for 17 years, my goodness.
Mhm.
And I got into sexology because a lot of my clients were in my clinical practice were talking to me about their relationships and about sex. And I realized a couple of things that were happening in the room. So I was really picking up on my clients' awkwardness in bringing up sex. Like, is this allowed? Is this a welcome topic? And I was also picking up on my own kind of a little bit of awkwardness, but also a bit of like, I'm not equipped to support here because sex was. I don't even remember it being mentioned in my psych degree at all. And
Mm.
then the more I started talking to other healthcare providers, the more I realized that that was a really common experience. I was talking to other therapists, even doctors, who were saying, I will never forget a GP telling me that in their medical training, sex was one lecture on one afternoon in their entire medical degree, and that just frightened me. So I realized there were like some pretty big barriers to people talking about sexuality and sexual health concerns. And we had clients feeling anxious to bring it up. We had healthcare providers feeling anxious to also bring it up, but also actively avoiding it because they didn't know what to do if it did come up. So uh, that got me really curious because I knew I wanted to support clients with regards to their sexuality and sexual health. So I went back and did a master's a few years ago in sexual and reproductive health and psychosexual therapy. And I finished that only a couple of years ago in 2023 and discovered this beautiful intersection of like mental health and sex and relationships, and that's where I love to work. So that's what I do now. And I'm in the business of helping people to really embrace and enjoy their sexuality. So I go and talk about it to anyone who listen in the hopes that I can start to kind of destigmatize that conversation and normalize the topic of sex a bit.
Love that. That's so amazing. And I
Mm,
love how you've just noticed where the area was lacking for you in your work
mm,
and in the field. And you went
mhm.
to explore that deeper and helped people in that. I think that's really
Yeah,
cool. Yeah.
yeah,
I'm interested in
yeah.
a couple of things that come up for me as you were speaking. That was firstly the stigma that you spoke about and the avoidance that perhaps is apparent and really palpable in mainstream medicine.
Mhm.
Why do you think we're like this as a
Mm.
human race? Like what's gone on here?
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it, that all the work that we're doing, and it would be easy to think that we've come a long way or that it's not as taboo, but really, at the end of the day, this is still a very sex negative culture. A lot of that has some old kind of stuff that I won't get into, old, probably religious stuff, colonialism
Mm.
stuff. Um, but this is still a really present issue for people. I think that was what shocked me so much when I was prompted to go back and do study was I had thought, even in my line of work, I had thought, oh, people are talking about this more. Like people are talking about it more with their
Mm.
healthcare providers. Parents are talking about it more. Schools are talking about it more. But I quickly realized things hadn't shifted that much from when I was in high school. Um, and I certainly have memories in my own upbringing of being actively discouraged from talking about sex by my parents. I certainly don't remember much in the way of sex education at high school. And I think the only thing that has shifted since I was in high school is that there's more misinformation out there. Like with the internet, I think
Mm.
I had foolishly thought sexual health literacy would be greater because there's more information, but there's just more. bad information.
Mm.
So instead, we've just got people overwhelmed and confused and um, really struggling to access the healthcare that they need. And you've got healthcare providers who never got this training in the first place and are just trying to do the best they can.
Yeah, it becomes
Mm.
guesswork, right?
Mm.
Yeah,
And
totally.
and I also witness, and because I do a lot of work with men, is
Mm,
that men, they generally can only go off what they think is the right thing to do. And if their parents or their teachers or healthcare practitioners are not giving them any advice around this whole topic,
mm,
then where are they learning it from? And
yeah.
of course, pornography plays a big part in this,
Hmm.
right? Because
Mm,
that if that's all that you see, and then your mates are the same, and then you talk
mm,
about it in that kind of context, then all
mm.
of a sudden it becomes this kind of bubble of this is how you do it. This is how
Yeah.
you make love to a woman.
Yeah.
And I really think you just spoke about misinformation, and I think that
Mm.
that is a massive part of this too.
Yeah. The other piece to this, the thing I really uncovered for myself in my own studies, was the power of of stories, these sexual scripts that we all have running in the background, which are the kind of internalized ideas that we've, maybe grown up with, we've gotten from our family of origin, from our sociocultural context, from media. And all of us have got these scripts running in the background that we've internalized as truths. And I didn't even know what mine were until I went back and really started doing this kind of study, which, as I said, was only a few years ago. But I hear some really common scripts amongst my clients, scripts that I resonate with, things about gender roles, as you were just talking about, things like sex is something that you perform.
Mm.
When men want sex more than women. Sex is over when the person with the penis ejaculates. Like these are really common scripts that people have internalized and will have running in the background with regards to how they approach sex without even kind of being consciously aware of.
So
Mm.
true. It's like
Mm.
programming or
Mm,
something, isn't it? It's like, yeah,
yes.
these scripts, absolutely. Yeah, I've just, as
Mm,
you're saying that, I'm noticing my stories
Mm.
inside
mm,
of myself,
yeah.
and where did
Yeah.
I get that from?
Mm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's so
Yeah,
interesting.
absolutely. And then like how does that show up for how we then would go and engage in relationships and in dating and in
Yeah,
sexual relationships? Like if we have those beliefs,
yeah.
they're going to show up subconsciously in terms of how we interact and engage sexually as well and communicate about sex.
Mm.
And you spoke about performance, and
Mm,
isn't that an interesting one in terms of like if you have this story or this script that
mm,
it's a performance type thing. How's
mm.
that going to affect the interaction with your partner? Can you explain like maybe what your thoughts are on that and how that can actually
Yeah.
really, yeah, impact?
Yeah. So when something becomes performance based, it then becomes something that we can like achieve or not achieve. We can kind of pass fail or do it well or not well. And this occurs also in a really like capitalist context as well, which loves us to be capitalism loves us to, of course, be concerned that we've got a problem to solve so that we go and buy solutions. So people are now, if you take all of that and apply it to sex, people are increasingly concerned that they are not having enough sex, that the sex is not hot enough or creative enough or enough novelty or enough whatever it is. So it becomes this like viewing sex through the lens of performance becomes achievement based. It becomes a source of anxiety because now it's something I'm good or bad at
Mm.
rather than something I experience. And it also becomes a more disconnected experience because now I'm observing myself as a performer rather than experiencing pleasure.
Mm. Spot
Mm,
on. Yeah.
mm.
Laura, I'm busting to ask you this question because I'm so
Go
curious
on.
to know. No, I'm actually curious to understand more about this paper that you've just recently got authored and
Oh,
you
mm,
authored. And I'd love you to
mhm,
share, I guess, yeah, where this came from, what inspired this, and what this paper is
mm.
about. If you can tell us more about
Yeah, of course, I would love to. So, the paper that I had published was about the impact of sexual communication. And it was particularly the impact of sexual communication on our enjoyment of sex. So, on how satisfied we are with the sex we're having and how much we want the sex we're having. Because I felt like anecdotally, it seems really obvious that sexual communication is a good thing. And I don't think you have to like look very far to hear people kind of banging about that it's really good to talk about sex. But I didn't feel like people could confidently articulate what sexual communication even was. And also, I felt really curious about, like, yeah, okay, it's a good thing, but how? Like, how is it making a difference um, if I'm communicating about sex effectively? Like, actually, how is it making a difference? So that got me really curious. And around the same time that I started writing this paper, I also started the relationship that I'm in now, which is highly communicative.
Mm.
And we talk about sex in some capacity. We talk about our sexual connection every day. And I think that shocks people, probably because they imagine that it's like a heavy turning the tally off, looking each other in the eye kind of chat. It's not at all. But we do intentionally visit the sexual part of our relationship every day deliberately. So, and that was a choice. That was a choice we made early on to nurture that part of our relationship. So all of those things kind of happened at the same time and got me super curious about this topic. So that was why I went and researched what the science tells us about exactly how sexual communication can benefit our sexual relationships and what we can do to have really great sexual communication.
Thank you. Amazing. I love the curiosity, what led you down that path, and your own
Mm,
experience, your work,
mm,
and putting it all into that paper. So I
mm,
really, though, I guess I want to understand what do you mean by
mm.
sexual communication?
Mm.
What is that?
Yeah. So, sexual communication is the many verbal and non-verbal ways within which we communicate our sexual desires, experiences, preferences, boundaries, and limits, right? And I'm very careful to say verbal and non-verbal ways. Because
Mm.
as I said before, when I said my partner and I communicate in some way like this every day, some of that is non-verbal, right? We communicate through touch, through expression of pleasure, um, through flirtatious or playful engagement. So there are, of course, non-verbal communications that we exchange during sexual interactions. But actually, I'm talking very little about the communication that occurs during sexual interaction. The really important communication stuff occurs around it, outside of the bedroom, right? The
Mhm.
the other component, a key component of sexual communication, is something we call sexual self-disclosure, which is that willingness to share my own experiences, boundaries, feelings, desires, limits, all of those kinds of things, and to have them received with warmth, understanding, acceptance, compassion, those kinds of things, and then being able to do the same in return. So this component between couples of sexual self-disclosure and that being, offered and received is one of the primary components that couples in the studies I looked at really had to have to rate their sexual communication highly. There had to be a high degree of sexual self-disclosure and a high degree of safety and trust. The
Mm.
reason that's so important, the thing that makes sexual communication so distinct and so difficult for us is how high stakes it feels to people.
Mm.
Talking about sex feels super risky to people. People are afraid of being judged, abandoned, rejected, shut down, hurting someone they care about. Like, it feels super high stakes. And I can really understand why people would avoid it as a result because it feels really risky. So the people in the relationship have to do a lot of work in the relationship to cultivate a context within which it feels safe to talk about sex. And that's why it's a really distinct skill set from general communication or non-sexual communication. It requires that extra degree of emotional availability and safety that couples who might communicate effectively about other topics might not necessarily be able to bring to this topic.
Mm. It's a whole other thing, right? Like, it's interesting because
Mm,
obviously we work with clients in couples with regular
mm,
communication, validation and that kind of stuff. But
mhm,
this is a whole, like, it's a whole nother, I guess, learning or the skill set that many
mhm,
couples probably haven't really broached because of all of those things that you brought up, shame,
mhm. Yeah.
judgment, fear. They don't, oh,
Mm,
let's not go there. That's kind of taboo to talk about.
mm,
So yeah, so
mhm,
that's interesting that you're bringing this to light and how important it is for a healthy relationship to not only have just your regular communication working well, but this sexual communication is a whole nother area to explore in your
Yeah.
relationship to improve and to grow and to understand. And I think even, you know, for us, I'm sure there's things that we're still learning and getting better at in that space, because you're right that the history, the programming, the, oh gosh, we don't talk about sex, you know, all of that stuff really impacts and debilitates you from
Yeah.
voicing those words, you know. It's
Yeah,
really crazy.
absolutely. That word shame showed up a lot in my research because there is shame stuff that's close to sex for so many of us. So shame are those, when I use that word shame, I'm really like, I get a visual of like a really tender spot, you know, like the most painful kind of bruise that when it is touched, when you know, brush up against it, when it is pushed, it is so deeply painful. Like shame are those parts of ourselves where we feel, you know, defective or not good enough or broken in some way. And when that stuff is activated, it's incredibly painful and it can be really distressing for people. So I guess you can start to kind of imagine how all of this might come together in a conversation about sex in our very sex negative culture where no one's taught us how to talk about sex. In fact, maybe it's actively discouraged. And then we're worrying about being judged, rejected, all of those kinds of things. And we've maybe got shame stuff attached to this. And we're sitting in the room with someone else who's got all their stuff too, and trying to have a conversation that we've potentially not really ever had before. Like it is a learnt skill. Plus, you're trying to regulate yourself through all of that. I really have an enormous amount of empathy and compassion for how hard that can be. And I talk a good game now. Like I know I'm saying I talk about sex every day now, but like as I said, my studies are pretty recent. This is new for me too. I spent the vast majority of my adult life having sex, but not talking about the sex I was having. Absolutely. So I don't just have empathy for it. It has been me for most of my adult life. So I really get it.
Yeah, which just adds potency to your message, because you're a human. You're not just someone who's done a course and
Mm.
you offer a protocol. Like, you know, it's lived
Mm.
experience. So I do really, I appreciate that, the human element
Mm.
to that as well.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think I was just thinking about safety, I guess, and how maybe we really need to kind of feel safe in order to explore this topic.
Mm.
And so does it mean, so like if a couple's going to dive into this, does it mean that they would have had to have some level of communication already established between the two of them when they feel safe enough to then step into this
Mm.
topic? Is that something
Yeah.
that really needs to be seen first or been felt?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The research I looked at said that people do need some baseline level of safety and connectivity established to be able to talk about sex. But I want to be really clear that that could, for depending on who you are, you could be having sex with someone that you met today and
Yeah.
still have established enough connection and safety to feel like this person cares about my experience. You know, like I'm going to be. They're demonstrating that I'm safe to ask for things. I'm safe to assert my boundaries. Like they seem to care that I have a good time as well, all of that kind of stuff.
Mm.
You can assess that in many different ways in many different relationships. So this isn't something that needs to necessarily be built over days, weeks, months, years. There are lots of ways in which we can establish safety and connectivity with someone. But I did want to say too, when you sort of said like dive into this, I am really kind of encouraging of people to consider the conversation about sex as a really ongoing fluid one because our own sexuality changes over time as well. All the time. Something I liked this morning, I might not feel like tonight, like let alone big life changes. So it's changing all the time. So I really like to let people know that sexual communication is not a sitting down, TV off, looking at each other, tabling all our issues, solving all our problems. That's not it, and that is not how I'd encourage people to dive into it the first time. And in fact, personally, that would be my worst nightmare if my partner came into me and said, "Can you like turn the TV off and look at me? And I want to talk about our sex life." I want to talk about the sex we're having. I'd be like, oh my God, I'd be so flooded in that moment. So
Mm.
the first conversation, if you are with someone who you've never really talked about sex before, the first conversation is just an assessment of like willingness, really. It's just a, hey, I listened to this podcast and it got me thinking about the fact we don't really talk about this anymore, or we've never really talked about it. And I want us to be great, like lovers to each other and have a great time together. I care about our sexuality. Do you think it would be all right if we talked about it more? Are you up for that? And if they say yes, then you say, great, we'll make sure we do that. Like that's it. That can be it.
Mm.
And you've opened that door and you can start that dialogue. You can start sharing resources. You can start sending a flirty text, maybe even a spicy text. Like you can
Mm.
start to open that door. But the first conversation is not a, hey, I need to tell you I've been like faking every orgasm since we got together. Like that is not where we start. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
Yeah.
call.
Yeah, I love that. And just bringing it into the regular routine, the normality of
Mm,
talking about this topic. It's the same as
yeah.
anything, I guess, in life. The more you do it and get comfortable with it, the easier it becomes, like those sorts of
Yeah.
topics. It's not such a awkward, you get flooded or you get, you shut down,
Yeah.
you can't think straight, all of those sorts of things that happens when we're confronted sometimes with topics we don't like.
The
I,
way
I
the way that
totally agree.
Mm,
and yeah, just the way that you framed that,
mm,
it felt warm to me. It felt like, oh, cool. Like, that's cool that you really want to explore that. It would still probably bring up some in me, but
Hmm.
still if
Hmm.
there's a willingness there to kind of go,
mm,
yeah, yeah, sure. Like I can, yeah, I'd be interested in that. Then
Hmm. Yeah.
I think that's the willingness piece you're speaking about. It just really tests to see, are we up for this? And if
Mm.
you're not, that's okay. But then we need to sort of make a decision on what that means.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. And you can acknowledge your own discomfort too. It's okay to say, like, oh, I'm feeling a bit awkward about bringing
Mm.
this up with you, or
Yeah.
is this a nerve-wracking topic for you? Because it is for me. Like, you can acknowledge all that
Yeah.
awkwardness too, which is why I'm actually a huge fan of sharing resources. I think that's a really underutilized tool for couples that I'm always talking to people about. We communicate in a myriad of ways.
Yeah.
Like it's okay to share a podcast or share a funny video or something and be like, oh, this made me think of you. And it's a way of kind of communicating something and also letting someone see you. And we all want to be seen and heard
Yeah.
fundamentally.
Yeah.
100%. I think some of
Mm.
our audience, just trying to reflect on some of our clients and some of the listeners out there and some of the issues that we've, like, I guess, addressed in sessions with couples is, often the man is all about pleasure. That's what his job is, just to orgasm first and the job done. And then she's feeling
Mm.
very unsatisfied, but she never speaks up about it, right?
Mhm.
So I guess I'd love to hear from you is what are some ways or inroads? And I guess you've given us one example, like just to
Mm.
start that conversation. But is there anything in particular that's coming to mind that she might be able to do in those sorts of situations to start to broach this a bit more in their relationship?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is a really common barrier, particularly if I stay with this example and think about people in a heterosexual dynamic, and I think particularly the women I work with, a lot of women, and I have this, have experienced difficulty with like taking up space, right? Like being allowed to have needs, to ask for things, and to receive.
Mm,
And this is something I work with a lot of clients on. Um, the ability of women to seek and take and receive pleasure. The pursuit of pleasure has an inherently self-centered, and I don't say that negatively, an inherently self-centered component to it. We have to be willing to receive and take to get pleasure. We have to be.
mm,
And that comes less naturally to some people, which I really understand. And then I overlay that with the sexual script stuff we were talking about before, about like sex is over when an orgasm is achieved or whatever it is. And then I add in what I know about women's arousal patterns and men's arousal patterns, and that men can arrive at enough level of arousal to achieve orgasm in far less minutes than women. So the average for women is somewhere in the vicinity, depending on what research you look at, of 30 to 40 minutes of direct stimulation to achieve enough arousal to orgasm. Significantly less for men.
mm,
So what that means is that you're asking this group of people who have, I'm making a massive generalization here, but who have traditionally struggled to receive, you're saying to them, it's going, if you want to achieve orgasm, that's going to take you longer. You're going to have to receive for longer. And I work with a lot of women who quite literally cannot tolerate receiving pleasure for any amount of time sometimes. So the answer to your question, what would I do with somebody struggling with that? I would get them to practice taking up space outside of the bedroom. So practice receiving, practice asking, practice having opinions. Next time someone says, what movie do you want to watch, or where do you want to have dinner, or what food should we order, or whatever, don't say, I don't mind. You choose, I don't mind. Just whatever you want. I'm not that hungry, whatever. Practice saying, actually, this is what I would feel like. And when I say that to people, people often go, oh, but I don't know. And I'm like, yeah, you don't know. So slow down, check in with yourself. What do I actually feel like in this moment? I actually don't really want to go out for dinner at all, or I would really like to watch something funny tonight, or whatever it is. Practice that in much safer places first than the bedroom. Practice receiving, practice asking, practice taking up space, practice saying no, practice saying, can I? Like, do all of that outside of the bedroom first.
What powerful tip. That's
Mm.
amazing. I can really see the benefit in many clients just practicing that, because I think that is right, that the women do struggle, probably men too in some degree, but I see in the history that we've worked with is the women do struggle to receive,
Yes.
and they're just so conditioned and programmed to do their role, do their job. They just keep going, 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 and they're like, oh, hang on, what do I want? What do I like? What don't I like? Yeah, and taking that
Yes.
time just to start to tune into themselves, to listen to that, insight for them would be so powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
thank
totally
you.
agree. My pleasure. I'd also want to see women spending more time on self-pleasure, so on solo touch and masturbation kind of exercises, because that's something I meet a lot of. I meet a lot of women who don't engage in solo touch or self-pleasure for a myriad of reasons, whether it's time or not feeling like it's allowed, feeling guilty, feeling shamed, not even knowing how they like to be touched, feeling that same anxiety about what's going to happen, how long is this going to take, I've got other things I should be doing, all of that kind of stuff. So getting women to practice giving themselves pleasure, is a lovely place to start practice receiving it.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that
Mm,
too.
I'm kind of stuck at one point here, Laura. I want to see if you can help me with it. When you mapped out that it takes 30, 40 minutes, something like that,
mm,
for a woman to, on average, to drop
mm,
into a place where she can possibly experience an orgasm, or something like that, wasn't it?
mm, mm,
Then, if a man's average time to ejaculate is significantly lower than that,
mm,
and that then rings a lot of alarm bells for me, in that there's some work to do for us men, right? In attentiveness, in presence,
mm,
in yeah, just being attuned to my
mm.
partner in the moments, rather than being in my head, being attuned into the body, being
Yeah.
having this as more of a next level experience, rather than a thing that we do, and then it's signified as being done when I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
So to
Yeah.
me, I'm hearing a lot of challenge in there, and a lot of growth
Mm.
opportunity, I guess, for myself and also for other men. Mm,
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really strong script, by the way, for us in our culture about like the focus of sex and the outcome and purpose of sex being around um, the person with the penis ejaculating. And that was a very strong script for me. I grew up with like in high school before I was even having sex, reading magazine articles about like how to give great oral sex to men. Never read an article about how to like 10 tips to ask for what you might like. That article didn't exist. So there's so much strong messaging around like centering the entire experience around the penis. Like that
Mm.
is a really strong script. So shifting that focus to, I love this word attunement, to like what's happening between us. What's the energy here? How are we both feeling? What can I do to notice more of your nonverbal cues? Again, back to communication. What can I do to notice more about what's shifting for you in terms of your body, your muscles, your breathing? How can I kind of notice what's going on for you? And of course, how can we verbally have a dialogue in those moments to understand what we each need? And then the other piece that came to my mind as you were talking is how can we then expand our sexual menu, which is a really, really powerful tool to bring in here. Expanding our sexual menu is a really important tool for a couple of reasons. One is because of these differing arousal responses. So this expanding our sexual menu refers to having, more things to order from the menu. So if I'm able to do that, I've got more to play with when arousal levels are differing. So there's that. The other reason I love a wide sexual menu is because there's lots to say yes to. And when I work with people with issues of mismatched desire, it's easy to say no to sex if my idea of sex is very narrow. So, for example, if I'm tired, if it's late and I'm tired, and the only script I've got for sex is that it is highly vigorous and goes for 3 hours, yeah, I'm probably going to say no to that if I'm like ready to go to sleep. But if I've actually got a really wide sexual menu to choose from with my partner, I can usually find something to say yes to. And that's why I think it shocks people if I share that um, my partner and I have sex in some capacity or are in a sexual space together every single day. And people go, oh my God, I couldn't have sex every single day. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not doing the 3 hours of like swinging from the rafters kind of sex. We're just in an erotic space together every day. And that means lots of different activities, energy levels, time frames. Like you can be in a sexual space and have things to say yes to and be attuned to each other without that focus on penetration or orgasm or certain positions or whatever it is that has normally been your script for sex.
Cool. Can you tell me, like, give me some ideas here? Like, it'd
Okay.
be great to hear some of these.
Mm-hmm. Of what you can do in a sexual space?
Yeah, I
On
guess
the menu,
I,
what's on
I
Yeah.
the
guess yeah, what is on
Yeah.
the menu that doesn't involve
Yeah.
penetration? Because like that script runs
Yeah.
so hard through
Mm.
Yeah.
all of us. I think not all of us, but
Yeah.
a lot of us. So I just want to maybe explore other ways that we can infuse sexuality into our
Yeah.
interactions. Yeah.
Yeah, yes. So that's why I use that language you probably just noticed me use, which, as I said, we're in a sexual space together. So we do a couple of things to really cultivate an erotic space together. Some of that is environmental. So you can cue in that sexual space with particular candle and playlist and lighting and outfits and whatever else you do. So you can really cultivate an environment that sets the tone, like, and creates a ritual around, oh, you're lighting the sex candle. That's promising. Like, yeah. So you can kind of cultivate and cue in for each other. I want to be in this erotic space together. And that's environmental. The other thing you can do is to create some great shorthand dialogue between each other to kind of quickly communicate with each other where you're at in terms of like how much you've got in the tank. Like,
Mm.
um, I'm really tired. Are you up for X instead? Which might be like, can we make out for a few minutes before we go to sleep? Or can we have a shower together? Or can we do something a little bit less energy or slow down or more sensual? Um, what else was I going to say to that? And the other thing that I think is really lovely to play with is um, whether we are kind of how we're interacting with each other, how the people are interacting with each other. So what I mean by that is um, bringing bringing an openness to perhaps things like mutual masturbation, or can I just kind of hold you while you masturbate? That those kinds of really low energy, um, sensual and erotic kind of activities that for some people will feel much more accessible than something that's a bit more high intensity like penetrative sex. And for a lot of people, when I start to talk about these things, even if the language might make them a bit uncomfortable, I know it feels a bit more accessible. If you're tired or anything. I have a chronic pain condition. I have years and years of vaginismus and endometriosis. Penetrative sex is associated with pain for me traditionally, not anymore, but it has been. So I rarely feel like that. And when I tell people that my partner and I have sex every day, but penetrative sex is like, you won't believe me when I tell you penetrative sex is about 20% of our sexual relationship. It is such a small part of our erotic connection. And I love to share that with people I have his consent to do so, because I think it gets people thinking about like what else is on the menu. The final thing I'll say in that is there are some great tools out there to help you do this. I have a fantastic tool on my website, which is a yes, no, maybe list, which is a list of nearly 300 things that you can do. It's divided into categories like warming up, communication, fantasy, role play, power, aftercare, like all different categories. And it's got a bunch of activities, things you'll have to Google that you won't have even heard of, I promise. And you will go through it and you will say, yes, I would love this, or I would love to keep doing it, or I'd love to try it. No, if it's a hard no. And maybe if it's like I need more information, or maybe in a certain context. And I get people to do this list on their own first, and then come together with your partner and have them do it on their own too, and then come together and talk through your lists. And that is a lovely communication exercise, because I don't expect people to come up with off the top of their head like a magical list of things they could do to expand their sexual menu. And in fact, my worst nightmare is being asked, like, what are you into? Because it just feels like such a broad question. I'm like, oh God, I don't, it all falls out of my head in that moment. But an activity like a yes, no, maybe list provides structure and play, like it's supposed to be fun, and a wonderful tool to communicate with each other. And you'll probably find some things that you're like, oh, we've never even talked about that before, but turns out we're both into it. Like, let's try that. Let's incorporate that. So yeah,
Beautiful.
that,
That's beautiful.
I could
And
say lots more on that, but
yeah, I just really, I guess what I'm hearing is these
mm,
resources are the
mm,
bridge to possibility for people,
mm,
because before I just heard that, I had my own script about what
mm,
sex is, and then it's just a yes, no based on this unidimensional kind of viewpoint. So now
mm,
it's kind of like, cool, let's look at expansion here. And I'm sure for a lot of the listeners,
mm,
they might be in a friendship space. And I think
mm,
that they're stuck in a friendship space
mm.
and perhaps they don't know how to transcend that. And I feel like the conversation that you're having right now has helped a lot of people to see the possibility of transcending that energy of friendship to
Yeah.
more vibrancy and connection and electricity. And so
Yes.
I'm actually excited
Mm.
about jumping on your
Yeah.
website and getting this
Okay.
resource. So we're going to do
Good.
this. Hey,
Well,
babe.
yeah, I'm
Oh,
excited.
So,
I'm like,
oh, I'm so excited. Oh my
so
gosh.
good.
You'll have
So
to tell
good.
me how you go.
I
That'll be
will. We
so fun
will.
to make. I'm
Yeah.
enormously proud of it. There's a lot of yes, no, maybe lists out there, but yeah, I'm enormously proud of mine. It's one of the most comprehensive I've ever seen. And the way it's divided up into sections, I love, because I if I say to you nearly 300 things on there, that's overwhelming for some
Yeah.
people. But you can just pick one section and
Yeah.
be like, hey, let's work on this one section together and see where we want to play and expand our menu here.
yeah. And I think
Mm,
I just want to just finally, before we wrap this up, I just want to speak
mm,
into like the importance of this stuff in relationship, right? I guess
mm,
a lot of the clients that we work with, we're just doing our stuff day to day, mundane, groundhog. Life's kind of boring, I guess, to some degree. So spicing this up or getting into the opportunity to deepen their relationship
mm.
in this intimacy space and this I
Yeah.
feel like it's like another depth that relationships need to go. If you've been in a
Yeah.
long-term or any sort of relationship, but I think it's like
Mm,
essential for the health of it, for the longevity of it, for the exploration of yourself, because if
mm,
there is stuff that isn't healed, or if there's wounds or
mm,
stuff that's hurt, like that's
Mm.
painful or whatever, then it's worth
mm.
exploring to help shift through that,
Absolutely.
because that's all we're also going to benefit the yourself and your partner, and I guess everything, the ripple effect, right? The ripple effect out
Mm,
to everything there. So yeah, I
Mm.
think
yeah.
it's such a beautiful work that you're doing and
Mm,
sharing, and
thank you.
yeah, it's been really insightful for me too.
Mm.
Yeah.
Good. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
So if the listeners want to find you and they want to find some
Hmm.
information, maybe they want to even do some work with you or grab these resources, what's the best place that
Hmm.
they can find you?
The best place to find me is probably via my website, which is lauralee.com.au, or via my Instagram, which is Laura Lee Sexology. They're probably the best places to find me and find out the work that I do, and yeah, everything we've talked about today.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And we can always put them in the show notes as well. So yeah. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank
beautiful.
you.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on as a
Likewise.
guest. Like we're absolutely like we've learned a lot here, and
I know our
yeah,
listeners will as well. This will
yeah,
be really helpful.
Oh, good.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Good.
thank
Oh,
you,
good.
and yeah, I hope you continue on your voyage of sexology in the beautiful way that
Me
you're doing
too.
it.
My pleasure. It's been such a lovely time with you both. I've really appreciated it, enjoyed it. Thank you.
Mm.
Beautiful.